Right. We should be online now. I hope you can hear and see me. I mean, I hope there's someone there, you know. But happy, what is it called? Tuesday. Well, yeah, I can hear myself, so that's a good sign. Now let's hope the stream will not break off in like a couple of seconds like last week, but, you know. You never know. So yeah, good morning. Welcome once again to these daily breakfast sprints. I almost feel like I'm doing one of these like terrible like morning radio shows at this point, although I'm hopefully not as annoying as most of those are. I don't have to pretend that I'm super awake and full of energy because I'm not. And neither do you have to do that, which I think is kind of the goal here. So yeah, we'll do the usual thing, which means I'll ramble a bit before we start and do a first sprint where I will definitely try to do administrative stuff, read emails, read comments, reply to comments, hopefully start plotting out the next part of the Mormonism video, and then I'll be back rambling some more, and then I'll try to write on that thing that will totally never become a novel, because if I say it's a novel, I'll probably stop writing it because I'm weird. So that's the plan for now. I have started the day by continuing my Bible reading, which I'm still doing for reasons. And turns out reading the Song of Solomon first thing in the morning is quite the experience. It's almost pornographic, that part of like the Old Testament. Be careful what you read in the morning is what I'm saying here. Maybe I should start like a book talk account and just talk about the spice level of the Old Testament. Maybe that's a goal. Or maybe it's not. Could be fun though. So that is sort of the plan for today, is hopefully get at least done with the Old Testament. I still have like a lot to go there. It's it's a bit of a long book. It might even be longer than the new upcoming Brandon Sanderson one, which is saying a lot, right? The audiobook for Wind and Truth seems to be like 62 hours, but my Bible's longer. Good question. Is Wind and Truth now longer than Atlas Shrugged? I could be. I'm sort of confused there because I always keep forgetting how insanely long Atlas Shrugged is. Which is, the kind of book no sane person should read. Hey, Britton, how you doing this morning? I have progressed to almost the end of Isaiah, so there we are with my Bible reading for today. Next up is Jeremiah, I think, and then Ezekiel, but I'm not quite sure. But Isaiah is interesting in that the Book of Mormon does quote a lot of like Isaiah verbatim, and it's so funny. Book of Mormon being somewhat of an interesting read, and you have like in I think it's some is in Book of Nephi, I think Second Nephi, and then later I think in Alma as well, Book of Alma, you have this moment when he's like, well, and now I'll quote some more Isaiah because I really like him, and then you just like get a whole big blocks out of Isaiah in the midst of the Book of Mormon. It's quite interesting. Although, to be fair, I'm listening to the New King James Version, and the Old and Book of Mormon does, of course, quote the Old King James Version of the Bible, because apparently that's the only good version of the Bible, at least according to Mormons, which I find somewhat interesting. But there we are. How's your day, Britton? How far have you progressed with either the Wizard or Eileen? Yeah, so yeah, I tried to record a video yesterday for the Joseph Smith part of the book of the Mormonism video, but I didn't get it done, so I have to try again today. I'm still wrestling with the structure there. It's there's parts in that video where I'm very sure what I want to say and how I want to say it, but like the Joseph Smith part is just there's so much stuff happening in those like roughly 15 years basically, and there's so much shit going down that it's kind of easy to sort of miss the larger patterns that are sort of happening at that time, and just by being constantly amazed by the next crazy thing happening, and the bank collapse and the tarring and feathering and the battles and everything, and it's like, oh no, there's something more like deeper going on there that is important to talk about, and I'm struggling in like how to do both things, because of course you need to hit all the high points. That sounds good, Britton. If I mean that's like halfway, right? Like if you're 100 something pages in, and you said it's like 260, so I guess you're halfway through Eileen now. I mean, the Wizard is pretty long, as I remember. I mean, not Sanderson or Malazan levels of long, but still in the 500 to 700 pages area, I would guess, roughly. So maybe focusing on one and then on the other is the more appropriate approach there. Yeah, it's like I was like, do I stop? Do I take a break from like the Bible stuff to reread Gog Magog and then read Lat Luda, which is coming out today? I expect the pre-order to show up in my Audible library in 52 minutes, because usually pre-orders show up at like 9 a.m. For whatever reason, which probably would allow me to realize which time zone Amazon is or Audible is using to determine when it is the new day, and thus a book has to be published. Yeah, if I would think about it. But wait, that would be GMT plus 10, I guess. So yeah. No, plus 8. GMT plus 8. Let's be reasonable here. Good thing about that was usually that new audiobooks would arrive just in time for me to put them on my phone and listen to them when I go to the gym, so that works out fine for me, that timing. But maybe it makes more sense to finish my Bible reading and then go straight to Gog Magog, which is obviously a different Gog Magog from the Gog and Magog in the Bible. And I suspect a different one from the Gog and Magog in the Sailor on the Seas of Fate collection by Michael Moorcock, which is one of my favorite Elric stories and probably one of the most psychedelic ones. Should probably reread some Elric at some point. I've not read any Elric in a while, so maybe it's time to return and do some of that again. But yeah, I don't know. The last, I don't know, couple of weeks, I've read a lot, but it's rarely the stuff where I'm like, oh, I'm super excited to read this, and then I just so don't plan ahead, and then suddenly I'm like, hey, I just have this random idea. I'm gonna read this now, and it did work really well with The Sunken Land Begins to Rise Again and Siege of Burning Grass. But right now, I don't know. That's interesting. That is an interesting observation. I mean, from obviously I haven't read it, but from what I've heard about like some of her other books, those get like pretty dark and grotesque really soon. So I don't know. Slice of life, yeah. But then again, I mean, if it's well written and if it works, then why not? I mean, you can do really cool in whatever genre you're working on. Hey, Brick and Spines, how you doing? Um, but I mean, for example, here, Central Station by Lavi Tidor is basically cyberpunk slice of life, and it works really well and moves really slowly most of the time. Have I asked you what kind of time zone you're in, Break and Spines? Because you mentioned that it's kind of hard for you to catch like any of those like live streams or whatever. So I was wondering how far away from here you are. Well, the emails and writing are slowly moving along. It could go better, but the last week I was traveling, went to that Jethro Tull concert and stuff, so I didn't spend as much time on it as I wanted to. But I will hopefully get some of it done today. I'm slowly waking up, so I feel like I might actually get some stuff done during sprints today. And hopefully that will mean something. I did at least manage to hit like one of the two main things that I want to have happened in the first chapter of the thing that will totally never become a novel kind of thing yesterday. So we are slowly getting there. Something I need one other thing to happen there, and then it's the first chapter ish thing will be done in a first draft, and then I can. Well, Britain, I mean, there's a lot of sexual repression all over the planet, so that feels realistic. But man, as I said, I just read the Song of Solomon as part of my Bible reading this morning, and holy shit, he's not holding back, is he? I mean, that's that's some pretty spicy Bible stuff there. Oh yeah, Australia, that makes sense. That's like almost like it's almost the opposite, basically, almost 12 hours time difference in either direction. Yeah, like 14 hours, but yeah, almost the opposite. That's bad. Well, I mean, to be fair, Britain, right? That's kind of what books can help us with, is like figuring that shit out for ourselves when it comes to stuff like sexual repression and angst and all that stuff, right? Because we can sometimes it's easier to sort of like work through issues and work through stuff by empathizing with someone else or a fictional character, than doing it with ourselves, because working through our own problems kind of needs that means that we have to admit our own failings to ourselves, and that can be hard. But like seeing it in someone else and going like, "Hey, that's the issue," makes it easier to sort of like make that jump and go like, "Okay, so this is something that I also fall into from time to time." It was for me when I read the Blackheart Man by Nella Hopkinson earlier this year. It's like, holy shit, that that main character is annoying as fuck, and I would do the exact same thing, so I should probably think about myself there as well. So that speaks for a good book, I would argue. Yeah, yeah, Philip. But I mean, Roth and Updike are considered like big American authors because they clearly touch something that is very core to a lot of American existences. I would argue, in a lot of ways. I mean, I've only read the Plot Against America, and that one I did really appreciate in what it does. Um, it does have some sexual angst, but it's mostly focused on the whole anti-Semitism thing. So there's not that much time for all the sexual angst, I would argue. But it's still there, right? I mean, yeah, that's like an interesting question, because like people always ask me for like lists, and I hate lists because lists always have this idea of like having an order in it. It's like this book is better than another, and tier lists and all of that stuff, and my top 10 books or whatever. I don't know. I can't do that because I'm really bad at ranking stuff in general. Like I used to write, and I sometimes still write for like a German metal magazine, and usually you have like the end of year, like every writer has to hand in like their top 10 albums, top 10 songs, and all of that stuff, and I always failed that because I'm really bad at just like ranking stuff. So but I should I've been thinking about doing sort of like, I know other booktubers have done these, like the history of fantasy, or the top 10, the 10 fantasy books you should read or whatever. And I've certainly toyed with the idea of talking about sort of like what I would consider a sort of good reading order if you want to understand like larger parts of the fantastic. And that's certainly something I might do more of in the future. I just, need to figure it out, get around to it, I guess. um, I mean, I also really want to get back to what I call those Sunday school videos, where I, looked at different ways of reading fantasy through those Guy Gavriel Clay novels, and I kind of got sidetracked after talking about Tigana, and I need to, read Song for Arbonne and talk about Song for Arbonne and how to use fantasy, or look at fantasy through a historical lens, because that's sort of like what I would say Kay does use for Song for Arbonne. Also, I've read too much stuff about the Albigensian Crusade to not use that one as an example. But I definitely want to do something of that sort. But it's difficult to come up to find the time, I would say, or find the right time, not the time. And obviously, I have time to do this kind of stuff, but it has to feel right, and that's probably like the biggest problem I generally have with a lot of stuff. And I guess it's also ADHD connected, but it's probably more than just that, right? Is that I struggle doing things just from a rational point of view. It has to sort of feel right intuitively for me to be able to actually do something, and that's something that can hold me back a lot when it comes to getting something done in time. Going Because suddenly it doesn't really feel right or whatever, and that's certainly something where that whole canon thing kind of might come in. That's an interesting one. So if the book is originally in English, then I'll definitely listen to the English one. I mean, why would I go for a translation if I can understand the original, right? When it comes to stuff that was written in German, then I will go for the German language version, of course. Although there's not that much interesting fantasy and science fiction being published in German, so there's very little of those. Um, when it comes to stuff translated from a language that I don't understand, there it really depends on what I can get. For example, Foucault's Pendulum, I can't get the English audiobook, so I went for the German one. And for a moment, I felt bad because I'm like, so often English like feels better, which is more like a cultural hegemony kind of thing. And so I felt bad for a second. Then I realized that's really stupid because Umberto Eco spoke fluent German and worked on the translation together with the actual translators. And the German translation of that book is definitely as good as the English one, probably. So why worry about it? So that's certainly something that I need to figure out, or not necessarily figure out, but like one thing that I find interesting, how we suddenly attach sort of like qualities to a language that are not necessarily there, right? So yeah, English if it's English original, and translation whichever one I can get usually. I mean, that's like the thing. There's just like a lot more stuff available in English than in German, because Germany, when it comes to technology and digital technology, is usually way behind the curve. So we're still getting this stuff slowly, which is really annoying. When it comes to like philosophy texts, right? There's a lot of like classic philosophy stuff, German philosophers, like the big ones, Hegel and Kant and so forth. And you get unabridged audiobooks of those texts in English, not in German. And I'm like, that's fucked up, right? And like another consideration, like one of the reasons why I'm currently rereading the Bible and that, or listening to the audiobook in English, is exactly that. When I talk about it in English afterwards in a video, it's easier for me if I have sort of like the English words and stuff in my head, especially when it comes to stuff, to books where there are very specific sort of like stylistic choices. Like for example, say with the Bible, right? Where knowing the biblical English is helpful when I have to talk about it afterwards, and I don't have to translate those very specific like biblical German into something in English, and make sure that everyone understands it, even though some of those word choices are very idiosyncratic in a way. For example, like in the Old Testament, you have a lot of people prophesying, and prophesying does not necessarily mean the thing we think it means, right? Prophesying is far more going into a trance and so forth. Having like a religious trance, probably something like you have with the whole like glossolalia kind of stuff with evangelical Christianity today. That's what they call prophesying in the Old Testament, which is why a lot of people just go and prophesy. That's not that they are prophets in the sense of they get like a direct communication from God and then go to the king and yell at the king for an hour because he's probably done something wrong. That's a different thing, but it means that the word has these double meanings. And prophesying is not the same term in German. So if I read the Bible and read that word in German, which I would have to check what it is, but it's not prophesying, or not like the direct translation of prophesy, the verb in German. So that's why sometimes it makes sense for me to check something in English, even though there is a German translation, or it was originally written in German, just to make sure that I get the vocabulary right. That's a good question. Like, I mean, there's a lot of fantasy written in German, but a lot of it is from like where I'm standing. It feels like trash. Maybe I'm just like insane snob about it. That's very likely, but you have a lot of people publishing, publishing like long ass series of like 15 novels about elves or dwarves, and it feels very derivative in a lot of ways. There is, I guess, a lot of like sort of like more like realist fiction, romance, thrillers and crime stuff, I think, are very well represented in like a German publishing space. But a lot of it feels derivative from like American or Anglo-American stuff. And maybe that's cultural hegemony. Maybe that's just because I'm relatively well sort of like immersed in the English language book community, that I know all of these things. I just encounter them first in English before I encounter them in German, and that leads me to think that it's derivative, even though it's just like people coming up with the same stupid ideas on, all kinds of in all kinds of countries, because we live in a global community, and while there may be like German specific aspects to society, a lot of like capitalism still sucks over here as it sucks in other places, and there is corruption, and there is a lot of like the mechanisms of society are very similar, so a lot of topics will be similar nevertheless, but it sometimes feels like they're sort of derivative of a lot of English language stuff in that regard. And then you of course have your historical novels and literary fiction novels that often deal with like very specific German topics, those obviously being either life during the Cold War in in Eastern Germany and Western Germany, and like how those were different, and working through the trauma of going through the GDR, which was a very authoritarian regime with the Stasi and everything. That's certainly something where you can write your deep thinking novels about. And of course, before that, and still, there's always the whole topic of like how to deal with Nazis, or how to deal with the fact that you find out that your parents were actually very active Nazis. And those are obviously very specific German topics, but those are usually handled more in like either in YA books, because YA books for some reason can get like really, really hard when it comes to, to drugs abuse and all the other stuff, which kind of makes sense, I guess, because it's something that um, people that are, become teenagers and are sort of like coming to the age of YA books, probably often for the first time, like on a rational level, encounter these dark topics. So having books that deal with them in a hopefully still somewhat age appropriate way makes sense. And then you have the same stuff coming back for like very just like a mature audience, and writing your serious the equivalent of like a Philip Roth or John Updike just for Germany. And then obviously the topics are somewhat different because we have our own demons to wrestle with, and sexual repression may still be one of them, but obviously there's stuff like racism plays out differently in Germany than it does in the US. So that's sort of like where you get the serious novels that are supposed to sort of take the pulse of the nation in a lot of ways. Those deal with different topics, but that's something we get, of course, as well. Britain. I don't know. I don't think I'm really good at judging which are good audiobooks, because since I require, since I'm very much relying on audiobooks in general, I take whatever I can get. Which is, when I usually argue with Derry about the quality of the Realm of the Elderlings audiobooks, where I'm like, no, they're fine. Look, not every voice works for every reader, a listener, but in general, they're fine. Recording quality is good, right? Seriously, there's no problems there. And Derry really hates at least a Life Ship Trader narrator, and I'm like, I don't see the problem there. So I think it kind of depends on what you try to get out of that immersive reading thing. I feel like there's a danger if you're reading, say, a fantasy book that uses a lot of like its own vocabulary, and if your sort of like internal way of pronouncing specific words kind of jars with how the narrator pronounces it. And there's stuff like that. For example, the Malazan Book of the Fallen has a switch in narrators after the first 3 books, I think. 3 or 4, might be confusing, either after Memories of Ice or after House of Chains. and the second narrator does pronounce a few words differently, and that was really jarring for me to get through. It's like, oh, that's not good. So I don't know how well fantasy works there. Uh, I mean, you just read the what's it called? Um, the things they carried. I thought that one was really good. That was well done. That was someone fairly like fairly famous actor narrated that one. I just keep forgetting who it was. I feel like the Discworld ones are really well done. The new ones, if you enjoy Discworld, um, but beyond that, I think you can do that with like every book. If the voice works for you, I think that's like if you're trying to get more into audiobooks, I think it's more like listen to like a sample and see if you can actually jive with the voice of the author of the narrator. I mean, there's a couple of narrator audio, writers that actually narrate their own audiobooks. That's always an interesting one because there you can basically get sort of like how the main how the writer thinks what the author hears in their head when they're writing the book. I know that say Nicola Griffith did narrations for Spear and for So Lucky, and she's going to do narrations for that older trilogy that I keep forgetting the name of the trilogy that had like the color covers and color titles. It's another one from like the early 2000s, and they're doing re-releases next year, and she's going to do the narrations for all three of those. Um, that certainly worked. I mean, we talked about it yesterday. I think, yeah, Brief History of Seven Killings might actually work really well, and that certainly does have like a lot of like really, really interesting, really good narrators in it. Robin Miles' narrations for all of the N.K. Jemisin stuff is also brilliant. I mean, that works really well. I mean, the good thing with Discworld Britain is that they are sort of connected, but each of them is like a standalone novel. There's, except for the first two, which are very clearly sort of like the second one, Light Fantastic, very much starts where The Color of Magic ends. So those two you should read together, but beyond that, you can just like read whatever you feel like it and come back later because it's not exactly like a lot of that you can forget and then not understand the next book. Like you can't necessarily take like a 2 year break in like the Malazan Book of the Fall or even Wheel of Time or something like that. Can be kind of rough, but with like Discworld, you can just like slot one in when you feel like it. And since they are usually short and somewhat lighthearted, they make for like a great sort of like in between bigger, darker books kind of read. So in that regard, you can just like read one whenever you feel like it, I guess. Um, oh wow. Shall we maybe actually do some sprinting? We've been talking quite much longer than I planned to. So let's be back at holy shit 9:20, I guess, and let's try to actually get shit done for a while. And I am back. And yes, Britain, Gardens of the Moon might work. It could probably help with, pronunciation and stuff, but there I would definitely recommend using the printed book. I mean, the printed one does have a map, and I think it also has a sort of like dramatis personae kind of thing, so you can check on people, which makes sense because there's quite a large cast in the first book already. But then again, the narration is really good. Ralph Lister is, I think, an excellent narrator. He has like a very sort of like gravelly kind of voice, which works really well for like military fantasy. So I think that could probably work. As I said, the annoying thing is that they switched out Ralph Lister for Michael Page after a couple of books. Don't get me wrong, Michael Page is also like a really good narrator. He does the audiobooks for the Locke Lamora series, for example, like Gentleman Bastards, for example. But there is certainly that thing happening later. Yeah, the Discworld ones, the new ones are really interesting in that the new ones are done by different narrators depending on which subseries you're in. And they've got some pretty well-known talents doing part of that, the narrations. And Death is always the same narrator, no matter which book, because Death always shows up in all except for, I think, one Discworld novel where I'm not sure if Death actually shows up. One of the later ones. I think there's one where he doesn't show up, but I might be mistaken. And in that regard, it's nice to have the same voice for him everywhere, because in the books when in the Discworld books when Death speaks, it's all caps all the time to sort of like signal that he does speak in a very different kind of voice from everyone else, because he's deaf. So using a different narrator makes a lot of sense there, and that's, I think, something where Discworld immersive reading might work, is that a lot of the Discworld novels do play around with typography a lot, having like different fonts for different characters and stuff. For example, the golems speak when golems talk, they have like a different script that looks faintly Hebrew, I guess, Hebraic in a way. All right, then, Britton, good luck with the dentist tomorrow, and good night. That is a valid reason to go to bed, I would argue. Yeah, good luck with that. So, how did you all do, in case someone is still out here beyond Britain? I hope you were productive. I certainly did read some emails and messages and stuff and wrote some, so I guess that counts as productivity. Not as quickly as I wanted it to be, but it is what it is. So I'll try to do my best during the next sprints to get the rest of that cleaned up, and then I can go and write some. We'll see how that goes. But yeah, I mean, if y'all are too busy or is no one listening, then I'll probably start the next sprint slightly earlier, because that allows me to be done slightly earlier, and then I can, go to the gym and everything. Wouldn't that be nice? I mean, finish the Bible and all of that stuff as well. And that's, not to be sneezed at. Allows me to go quickly into Ludluda and, well, Gog Magog first. Yeah, I still need to write at least one email and figure out some stuff, but, forcing myself to work is, after all, the goal for this year. All right, so I guess that's what we'll do. I'll be doing another 45 minutes of sprinting, and then we'll be checking in around quarter past the hour and see how everyone has done and if I have actually managed to do some writing and so forth. And yeah, good luck, everybody, and I'll see you in 45. And we are back. Well, I am. How's everyone doing? Is anyone still here? You are, well, no, you're not late. I mean, hey, Ida, you are definitely not late. I mean, almost late, but yeah, the stuff kind of got pushed around a bit this morning because for some reason I got distracted and we didn't start the first sprint at, quarter past, but more like half past. And so everything is somewhat shifted to the back, but I am, well, back again, I guess. I did even manage to write a few sentences and another email and stuff, so I guess shit's moving, which is obviously good. Yeah, I mean, it's not as far as I wanted to get with the writing, but then again, I just got like another email right at the end of the first sprints, and I, had to actually reply to that one, so that did take some of the time. Anyways, I hope you have a good morning so far, and yeah. Maybe even got something done so far. I will now probably, I will go to the gym. I will continue all the joys of the Old Testament. I have the book of Jeremiah next. And that is definitely going to be full of excitement. Well, that sounds good. An extra day of productivity sounds like a really good thing. I don't usually have that luxury. I mean, my goal is to finish the whole Mormonism video this week. I'll be leaving for a concert on Saturday, very early morning. So ideally, what I'll do is get the whole thing done by Friday evening, so I can upload it and then set it public and be away and at a concert and probably slightly inebriated for the rest of the day, so I don't have to deal with the comments and reactions and so forth, which does mean that I can hopefully avoid the anxiety that usually comes from putting up like a large video where I'm like, oh god, hopefully people won't hate it, and then nobody watches it. But if I don't check numbers and stuff because I'm busy doing doom metal things, I might avoid all of that and just deal with the fallout on like Monday. Which seems like a reasonable approach, I think. Or at least the safest approach I have. But what that means is I really have to buckle down and get that shit recorded quickly and maybe record more than one part per day or whatever. Let's see if these things work. After all, I mean, I can just record the first part later when I come back from the gym. Maybe I can come up with like a proper structure while working out, which does sometimes help with focusing my thoughts. So there's that. So yeah, since I still need to actually pack my stuff so I can catch the bus, I guess I'd probably end this now-ish. And we'll meet again tomorrow morning. Maybe. Yeah, I mean, we'll definitely meet tomorrow morning, at least some of you. So yeah, see you around then. And good luck with productivity. It is, after all, sometimes hard.